Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's MSU Extension virtual breakfast. My name is Jim Islib. I'm an MSU Extension field crops educator serving the 15 counties of Michigan's Upper Peninsula. I have a few things to mention before we get started. Please make sure that your microphone is muted during the presentations. Uh, you should be checked in to the webinar with your first and last name, especially if you're interested in getting MDARD pesticide applicator recertification credits or CCA credits. We need to have your first and last name to verify your participation. So check on the participant list, find your name. If it doesn't have your first and last name, hover over your name, click on it, and then click the word more and rename yourself. We will be using the chat box for your questions. If you have questions, please type them into the chat box found at the bottom of your screen. And the information for restricted use pesticide recertification credits and CCA codes will be given around 7:30. Following Dr. Cassida's presentation, we're going to have our weekly ag weather update right around 7:15 or thereabouts. With that, I want to mention that MSU extension programs are open to all. The collection of demographic data from program participation is important. It's a mandated aspect of all MSU extension programming. It is voluntary, and the information you provide will not be used in any way to identify you personally, but rather as a member of a group that participated in this program. There is a link shared in the chat box, and we would ask you please to take a minute to fill out that demographic information. It's quite important for us. Thank you. And with that, I want to introduce our topic speaker for today, Dr. Kim Cassida, MSU forage specialist. And Kim is going to be talking about forage management and supply in a drought. With that, Kim, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and you can share yours.
There we go. Hopefully you can all see a picture of our drought situation. We decided to have me talk to you all this morning because we are looking at perhaps a little bit of a situation with our forage supplies this year. And this is related to the weather conditions that we've been having and also some historical things that have been going on with our forage supply. And in a few minutes, Jeff is going to give you the detailed evaluation of the drought situation. But from this most current drought monitor, you can see that it certainly has not gone away. So what is that doing to our forage supply? One of the things that is a concern is the fact that wacky weather in general is not conducive to our forages performing well. And we've had a number of years in a row of unusual events. And when you add these all together, particularly for our perennial forages, it has a cumulative stress. It's one thing when you're growing an annual crop and you have weather that occurs within that year, it only affects the crop during that year. When you're looking at a perennial crop like alfalfa or our perennial grasses, that stress from one year can carry over into the next year. And the stresses that we've had we've had about all of it. In recent memory, we've had unseasonably cold weather. We've had extra hot weather. We're in the middle of a drought. Not too long ago, we were in the middle of exceptionally wet weather. And we get these things alternating with each other. And none of this is particularly good for our forages. I know this spring, the situation that we've seen, it warmed up pretty good early on and got things broken out of dormancy and growing, and then it turned cold again. And we saw significant damage from some of those late frosts on some of our grasses. Actually, we saw more damage on our grasses on campus in our research trials than we did on our alfalfa. And then it would alternate back from cold to hot. The plants don't know what to do. They don't grow as well as they would if conditions were predictable and optimal. Another thing that's affecting our current forage supply is that the drought area is large. It's not just Michigan that's affected, and obviously that has an impact on where we could import forage from to cover any deficiencies that we might have. I was just down in Ohio last weekend, and we might feel a little jealous right here at the moment, but they were actually complaining about too much water. They couldn't get their hay off because they couldn't get it dry, and their fields had standing water in them. So there's many different things that can affect what we have access to. USDA released their forage supply inventory. They do that in May and December. I'm going to show that in a little bit more detail here in a second, but in general, our inventory was down 14% in May 2021 over May a year ago. Another thing that concerns us about this situation is that we know there's a tendency when the price of corn goes up that people tend to take hay acres out and put them in corn. And while we don't know if much of that has happened yet, that is something we are concerned about, actually reducing our acres of hay that we have available. So here is that hay inventory data. I went back over the last 10 years and pulled the numbers out from previous reports. The graph on the left is the current hay stocks. So the states that are in red had a drop in hay stocks for 2021. And you can see that we're kind of alone here in the upper Midwest as having a drop. But if you look past Minnesota and Wisconsin, you see a whole lot of states with a deficit. Now, interpreting these numbers, the hay stock that we see in May typically is the minimum we're going to see for the year because people have been feeding hay out all winter, and that's just before the new crop starts coming in. Whereas the blue line here in the chart is the hay stocks in December, which represents roughly the maximum hay stocks that we'd have available. So you can see back in 2012 when we had our last bad drought, our production was down as shown by our December number, and our hay stocks dropped to the lowest level that we had seen in quite a long time. We managed to replenish that looking at the May numbers by 2015. And ever since then, we have not had especially good hay years for various reasons. And our hay stocks have tended to decline. So even though we had a little bit of an improvement last year, we were already very low. So it's good to improve, but it doesn't necessarily alleviate our problem. And the other thing that we have going on here is while there is some hay available, it has been really difficult to make good hay. So excellent or premium quality dairy hay is in extremely short supply and has been for probably about the last 3 years because of weather conditions that have made it difficult to make high quality hay. Our hay yields are also not where we would like them to be. Again, looking at this over the last 10 years, we had a pretty sharp drop in 2012, followed by some recovery. But again, since about 2015, our overall hay yields have been declining. And the purple line here shows our alfalfa yields, and the red line is all hay combined. And again, while we saw a little bit of an improvement last year, it's not enough to get us back up to where we would like to be. So what can we do about this? I'm going to offer a couple of suggestions for alternative forages or different ways to think about your forage supply. And one is to think about double cropping silage, corn, and small grains. This is a system that's been worked out pretty nicely in New York State, and their climate is actually not that much different from ours. So the idea here is you're going to grow a small grain, and this is as a forage, all right? The two that are the best suited for this are winter triticale and rye. And we have new ryes, which are hybrids. These are coming out of Germany. We've been doing a fair amount of testing of them in our variety test program, and they compete very well against triticale, and they have better forage quality and yield often than the conventional rye varieties. So what the sequence here would look like is you would plant your corn in your typical mid to late May time. You chop it in August, September, as early as you can. And then in September, you can plant the small grain. You chop that in May when it's at the flag leaf stage. You still have time to come back in behind it in May and repeat the cycle by planting your silage corn. It is very important to remember in this system that this is not being treated as a cover crop. While it does serve a purpose as a cover crop because you are covering the soil, we are managing these small grains as an optimized forage crop. You want to use good seed bed preparation. You want to have weed control. You want to have a precise seeding rate. These new hybrid ryes are recommended to be planted at not bushels per acre, but actually 800,000 seeds per acre. And you need to be applying fertilizer. So P and K according to soil test, and typically nitrogen would be applied at a level a little bit less than what you would plant for winter wheat, or what you would apply to winter wheat. Here are results from our most recent forage variety test. These are the yields from 2020. On the left, we have our winter triticale numbers. And on the right, we have our winter rye and hybrid rye. So this is a one-cut system. And this particular year, we were a little bit late getting out there to cut it. We actually didn't get it cut until after it headed out instead of at flag leaf. But we're still seeing excellent yields of 4 to 5 tons of dry matter per acre for the triticale, and up to 5 tons per acre for our ryes. Now on this particular chart in this year, the normal rye is the Pro Power and the Bono, whereas the Teo, Serafino, Bracetto, and Progas are the hybrid ryes. So you can see there's a range of yields. The best of those are similar to the conventional ryes. Another strategy is to double crop an annual forage after wheat. So part of the idea of both of these things that I'm suggesting are, because you have land that is idle for part of the year, we always have a crush for land when we're talking about forage. Where are we going to put it? But if you have a field that is idle after another crop comes off, that's an ideal place to try and put the forage in. So on those corn silage fields, that works very nicely over the winter because you don't have anything else growing out there. After a wheat crop comes off, you again have a window of opportunity that is, depending on where you are in the state, up to 3 months long of pretty good growing weather. And we do have forage options that can fit into that window. And some of them are oats or triticale again, but in this case you would want to use spring triticale, which will come out of the ground faster, because the idea here is you're going to harvest it in the same year before winter comes. If you used a winter triticale in this system, you would not get as much growth quickly early. And you can put these, we've had pretty good luck with these with or without field peas being added. And again, this is not Austrian winter peas we're talking about. These are regular field peas, because we're not trying to get these through the winter. We want them to come up quickly and grow so that we can get a cutting, get our cutting done before winter comes. Another crop is teff grass, which has gotten quite a bit of attention as being a desirable forage for the horse hay market. And teff is a crop you can get harvestable hay yield in 6 weeks. It really grows quite quickly, but it is fussy. It requires very precise seedbed preparation. The teff experts will say you should be able to bounce a basketball on a teff field that's properly prepared for planting. Needs to be fine textured and firm. And if you can get that done and these seeds are tiny. You have to plant them with some precision, but they come on really, really quickly. And you might even be able to get a second cutting off of it because it grows back really fast. I'll show some data here on the teff, ryegrass, and crabgrass here in a second. Another option is Italian or annual ryegrass. This is a cool season grass that will give you a harvestable yield in a pretty short window. And lastly, we have crabgrass. I'm going to let you mull that over for a second before I show the data. And lastly, forage brassicas. Here is the data on teff grass and crabgrass from our variety test last year. We did this at 2 sites. We had it in East Lansing and also in Chatham to see how things would do in the UP. Down in East Lansing, we were able to get 2 cuttings off both of these annual warm season grasses. So for teff in 2 cuttings, we had a total of just over 3 tons per acre of harvestable forage. And crabgrass was actually a tiny bit better. Now, this is where you're thinking, crabgrass, really, what is she talking about? Crabgrass actually makes an excellent forage, but this is not your weedy crabgrass. It actually is the species large crabgrass, which is the same thing you might find in your field. But as many things, it has been selected specifically for forage production. And a cultivar was released probably about 20 years ago now called Red River by the Noble Foundation. And it does not bear much resemblance to a wild crabgrass. It's very, very leafy, has good regrowth potential, and a lot of good forage. And a newer variety is Mojo. And these are warm season grasses also, and because of that, they fit really well into this late summer window. They don't require as much water as some other things. Up in Chatham, we still had success with these, although they got 2 cuttings off of their teff grass and only 1 from the crabgrass. And up there in the 2 cutting system, the teff grass yielded a little bit more, up to about 2.4 tons per acre, and they got just over 2 tons per acre from 1 cutting of crabgrass. And again, this is land that's not producing anything else during that time period. The other forage to think about for after wheat is the annual and Italian ryegrass. Here is our results from our 2020 test. And this was actually a crop that was planted late in 2019. We were not able to get more than 1 cutting in 2019. So that data is over here on the right-hand side of the chart. But these all survived the winter, and we came back the next year and got 3 cuttings off of them. So our trial total over the 2-year period for these is up to 5.5 tons per acre. And this is also very high quality forage that grows back quite quickly and enables you to get more than 1 cutting. Now, in this type of a system here, you would need to leave it in for the whole summer to get those 3 cuttings. But what some people will do is just do the seeding year cutting and then the spring cutting and then take it out and put something else in there if you needed that land for something else. I want to make a couple of comments just about nitrate toxicity. A lot of people will ask, you know, I've got a drought. I need to get this forage going. What can I do? Can I put nitrogen on it? Will that make it grow? Sadly, that is not the case. You need water in order for plants to use nitrogen. This is one of the reasons why it's so important with a perennial forage stand to keep good soil fertility throughout the life of that stand so that you're ready for these adverse things when they happen. So you already have a good, healthy stand of plants that can make it through. If you do apply nitrogen during the drought, the most likely thing that's going to happen is you'll get nitrate toxicity in your forage, particularly in our warm season plants like corn, sorghums, Sudan grass, and millets are very prone to this. And that is the reason why anytime you're harvesting forage during a drought, we always recommend that you test it for nitrate before you feed it or graze it. All right. If you ensile it, it will reduce the nitrate content a little bit, but it can still be toxic. So it's better to be safe than sorry. Test it first. And then I just want to finish up by asking you to consider grazing cover crops. I mentioned brassicas as being an option to go in after wheat. And we are conducting some research right now. We've done this previously with cattle. The current study is using sheep, where we go in after wheat harvest, plant a brassica mixture, and graze it in the fall. And we've got two mixtures that we've been using. We've done this for 2 years so far and have another year to go. The mixture that we call Brassica here has nothing in it but brassicas. The blue here is showing you the top part of the plant, and the purple is the tubers, because we had turnips and radish in this mixture along with forage rape, and the turnip and radish will actually make edible tubers that the animals will eat. And this one called mixture included the same brassicas plus also millet, field peas, rye, oats, and berseem clover. And this was done in 2 different years with quite different weather conditions. In 2019, we had drought after planting, followed by cold weather during the fall. In 2020, we had even worse drought after planting, but we had better temperatures through the fall, which enabled us to actually make more grazable biomass. And this supported excellent lamb gains. We saw the same thing with the cattle when we did that before. And one of the interesting things about this experiment is we've actually done a sensory panel with the meat from the lambs to see whether or not a bad taste was imparted by grazing these brassicas. And in fact, we found that the panelists preferred the animals that were finished on the brassica diet. That was a little bit surprising to us, but obviously there was no detrimental effect of growing these. And then, of course, you go back in the next year and you can go back in with your corn or whatever would be your normal rotation after wheat. So I'm just going to finish up with pointing you towards a few resources. And I realized after the fact I probably should have put the URLs in here. So we'll get that information out to you. But my website is the MSU Forage Connection, which has updates on extension activities and research projects. And it also is the archive site for all of our variety test data. MSU Extension also has a forage site, which links back to mine for many topics. We have the Michigan Hay Sellers list, which is a venue where you can post hay for sale and help you find buyers. And MSU Extension has also put up a site with drought resources in general, not specific to forages, but has information that will help with many aspects of the drought. And with that, I am going to stop my share, or someone's going to stop my share.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Kim. We do have a few questions in the chat. I want to encourage you to continue to put any questions you may have in there. I see Dr. Cassida has responded to one question about the quality of rye or hybrid rye forage compared to other small grains. And Kim indicated that that the hybrids are generally better than conventional rye. Another question in here, is there anything that can be done for perennial forages to improve yields, or is the drop over the last several years due to the wacky weather patterns?
Well, that's a very good question. I think it relates back to what I said about fertility. We have to be careful when we establish new forage stands that we are doing everything we can to get a strong stand right at the beginning. We need to make sure we keep the pH and the fertility where it needs to be, particularly in the case of hay. You're removing a lot of nutrients in that crop. And if you don't replace it, at least over time, that the forage becomes disadvantaged, particularly potassium. Potassium is a very important nutrient for persistence in a perennial crop. And we see a lot of low potassium values in hay fields in Michigan. Because, and the reason all this is so important is that once the stand gets run down, it's really difficult to pep it back up. When those individual plants are weakened, it becomes, well, they become weak. And you eventually reach a point where all you can do is do a complete replacement of the stand. And as we all know, that's quite expensive. Because unfortunately, I think that the unusual weather patterns are probably going to continue. But a healthy plant will withstand environmental stress much better than a plant that's already weakened. And another thing that we need to consider is our harvest schedules and our cutting heights. In the cases of our perennial grasses like orchard grass and timothy, you want to make sure that you are cutting those at least 4 inches high. That's higher than we normally would cut for alfalfa. But the grasses are storing energy in the bottom of the stem base. And if you cut that off, that weakens them further. So if you have an alfalfa grass mix, you need to cut it a little bit higher. You know, we sit around, the extension people sit around and we discuss whether or not we should revisit fall harvest schedules. We all know that harvesting forages during the period when they're getting ready for winter can weaken them. We often do it anyway because we need the feed, especially in a year when we're short. But that's another thing that contributes to an overall decline of productivity.
Okay, thanks, Kim. There was another question on forages. Tim asked what the rate of triticale and rye were in those trials that you mentioned.
Yes, and while I saw that, and I was trying to look that up while I was talking, and I'm going to have to find that for you.
Okay.
But,
I thought you mentioned 800,000.
Well, that's the recommended rate for the rye, and that's probably what we planted it at, but I'm thinking he wants to convert that into pounds.
Okay.
From that question. So I'll have to do that conversion.
Question for Jeff. Strange pattern flow for storms last round, several north to south, some east to west. Any reasons?
Yeah, and there's no question that it's a very observant eye. I think that was our colleague Bruce asking about this. It had to do with the upper air. Most of those steering mechanisms for showers and thunderstorms and during the warm season are up around 10, 15,000 feet above the surface. And so the winds there play a major role in determining which way. And of course, we're used to seeing things mostly move from west to east in our part of the world in the Midwest. But last week we had a situation with the upper air where it was relatively weak flow under, and there was an awful lot of low-level moisture available, and we just saw convection literally bubble on a daily basis. And there just wasn't much, there weren't many dynamics, not much strong wind in the upper part of the atmosphere to see that normal southwest to northeast or some variant of that. And I there were 2 days in particular I remember the east to west. One was actually southeast to northwest flow where we saw and that's pretty unusual for here, but it had to do with the fact that we just did not, the flow of the jet stream was meandering with large amplitude troughs and ridges, something we just don't see that often in the warm season, but last week we had that. So that's why we saw that strange movement.
Thanks, Jeff. Got a couple of insect related questions, and before we address them, I'll throw one out also. I'm in the Upper Peninsula and we're still getting first cutting accomplished, but I have never seen alfalfa weevils like this ever before in 31 years of work up here. So it's been an extremely unusual year for alfalfa weevil damage in my part of the state. But Dr. Chris DeFonso had a comment about soybean aphid. Chris, are you still with us?
I am with you. Jim, I don't think it's necessarily so unusual about these insect populations, the insects that make it through the winter. I mean, this may be a new normal as we get a little bit warmer overall with, climate change. And I've always wondered if we're going to be more like Southern Ohio or Northern Kentucky. And that would mean changes in grain aphid survival, being able to survive here, alfalfa weevil overwintering, any of the insects that kind of hang out over the winter when you don't have much of a winter. You have problems. So yes, we found soybean aphids at the Saginaw farm last week, and it's downwind from a lot of buckthorn, which is the overwintering host. And this week I went back and the April planted fields are like 100% infested. That's not necessarily unusual. They get blown into and if you're going to plant earlier, you're going to pick up some of these early infestations. Do not spray these early infestations. Watch and wait. They're loaded with parasitoids. They're loaded with biocontrol. This is why Michigan and the East has better soybean aphid control overall than Iowa, Minnesota, and places like that where they jump the gun and spray at one aphid per plant. The battle is happening under that canopy, and in Michigan and Ohio and Ontario, usually the biocontrol wins, and the amount of parasitoids are stunning that are recruiting to these aphids, and they don't see that out west. So I've got a FONSFAX kind of half ready to go, which I will send out maybe by the end of today or tomorrow, and I'll send some pictures of that.
Okay, great. Question came also on the spider mite situation.
Yeah, that's all on Jeff. We're waiting for Jeff to change all this. And right now, I think beginning of July is when some of these populations then begin to set up, like they've had enough dry weather or enough, so, and same, anything that sucks is going to benefit when it's a little bit drier for the most part. So this is on Jeff right now. I blame him for everything. So.
Good to have a fall guy. A question on the wheat crop, and is our wheat crop beyond the window where fusarium would be a challenge? And Dr. Marty Chilvers responded in the chat that we're beyond the infection risk for head scab of wheat. Marty, are you on? Could you take your mic and expand?
So we're beyond. So yeah, traditionally it's sort of thought that during flowering, that's all the head scab pathogen fusarium is infecting through the flowers. Regardless of whether that's true or not, that period of flowering is when things are susceptible. So now that we're way beyond that, we're definitely outside that window of risk. Of course, if there was any infection, even though it was dry for the most part across most of the state, certainly, moisture through into ripening can potentially push up any infections that have already occurred, but we're way beyond that spray window for management.
Okay, thank you, Marty. I think we're caught up on our questions in the chat. So with that, seeing that we're all answered, I'm going to wrap things up and thank you very much for your participation, and we hope to see you next week for the next virtual breakfast.